Can anyone hear me? Okay, we're going to make a start. So thanks for using your initiative and managing to find where A2 was on floor 6. If you went up the other stairs, you'd have ended up on the other side, and we did that last year, and I haven't learned very much. So welcome. If you're expecting to be at the Changing Tide session, you're in the right place. So that's a good start. My name's Mark Fletcher. I'm the Global Water Leader at Arup. And up to last month, I was the chair of British Water as well, which was looking at representing the UK water supply chain. I've spent 38 years working in the water sector in the UK in particular, so this is going to be a really interesting session, and I'm really looking forward to everyone's contributions. It's going to be great. Great session in store. We're going to start with Dr. Rob Bradburn. He's Chief Scientist at the Environment Agency, and he's going to give us a keynote setting the scene, really, an introduction to the history of UK climate resilience. And we've got 3 teams in this session, bringing different perspectives to the UK in terms of climate resilience. And each team's got somebody to think about from a sort of legacy lens or legacy perspective, a reality lens, and a sort of possibility lens. So 3 teams, each covering each of those particular perspectives. And they're going to sort of debate 6 themes. And we're hoping to convince the audience that their perspective is the most important when considering that aspect of UK climate resilience. We're going to close out the session by one of our Arup-sponsored future leaders, Sophie. Sophie, do you want to stand up and turn around so everyone can see? Lizzie Budden. That's why I didn't know your dad, because I thought he was a penman. Yes, Lizzie Budden, and she's going to give us closing remarks on the session relating to these 3 competing perspectives. Okay, so Ellie, first of all, Kirsten, can you just explain what we're going to do with the Menti?
So throughout the session, there'll be a QR code available on the screen. If you have any questions for the panelists around the themes that they're talking about, just scan the QR code, send in your question, and we'll make sure that gets directed towards the panelists in the kind of later half of their panel.
Thanks very much. And Ellie's going to monitor our timing. So what are you going to do, Ellie? How are you going to do that? Right, okay, so this is for all of you speakers. Ellie's going to put her hand up when we're on time. Okay, it's quite complicated what's going on. Lots of moving parts. It's a little bit like rubbing your tummy and tapping your head at the same time. So I'm expecting it might go a little bit off the rails, but it doesn't matter. I think it should be enjoyable, and that's the main thing. So, Rob, maybe you could just come down and please give us your keynote. Can we have a round of applause for Rob, please? It's going to be interactive, and I'm going to find people who are just on the phones. Let's pay some attention. People come all the way here prepared. It's really good. And if you've got an opportunity, use your phones to ask questions. Okay? So over to Rob.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to assume, yeah, it sounds like you can hear me. Well, thank you very much, everyone. It's lovely to be here today. And thank you to the organisers for giving me the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon from the wonderful city of Stockholm. Just coming down from the airport, as I did a few minutes ago, seeing how water forms so much of a part of this city, and that is something that is replicated, of course, around the globe. And the session today, thinking about resilience, really brings out that feeling of how we interact with that water system and that water environment. And so I'm really looking forward to the discussions later about how the different aspects can teach us different things about how we might build this resilient future that we're looking for. Because tides are indeed changing. That's the title of the session, and I see it happening in the UK, all around our coasts. The tides are changing, and those tides are interacting with how the hydrological cycle in the country is changing. And we need to respond to that now, because those changes are going to require very much an approach that works across sectors, and almost certainly an approach that is going to take many years to implement. So, just looking back at the last couple of years in England, we have had this spring one of the driest springs, I can happily say, in my lifetime. Since 1976, the drought that everyone remembers in England, I was one at the time, and this year's the few months of the spring this year have been as dry as they were then. And yet, the previous year, we had some of the wettest, biggest storms in the autumn. And it just shows you how quickly we can shift from a situation now where we have far too little water to a situation where we have far too much water. And we have a system in England, and I'm sure this is replicated around the world, that kind of works because we know where the water is and when the water is. And that's what we're really starting to see in England, where, of course, the English always talk about the weather because it's so interesting. But now that weather is getting even more interesting and even more difficult to talk about. So I think this is a great time to come together to think about the challenge, to think about how we bring resilience into the way that we support our water ecosystems, how we design, operate, govern the wider water systems that we work in. And I was reflecting on this beautiful chalk stream. It's a very soggy chalk stream. When I went to see it, my team loved to send me out into the wilds of England to see how the water system's working, and they always seem to manage to find a time when it's pouring down with rain to send their chief scientist out. But the chalk streams that we have in England are a very rare ecosystem globally. They're incredibly culturally important, and they teach us a lesson about resilience, because they teach us that the water system itself helps us as a country to be resilient in times of a changing climate and population change and many other changes. And also us as a society are the ones who have the responsibility for keeping the water system and the water ecosystems resilient in that changing climate as well. So it's very much a two-way stream. So we're focusing on looking at the past, looking at the legacy, looking at now, and looking at the future. So where have we come from? Well, in the UK, we do have some truly, truly remarkable water infrastructure. We're not perhaps unique in the world in our history of the water infrastructure, but we are still running Roman aqueducts. We are still very, very dependent on Victorian engineering for our sewage network. And yet we're mixing that with very modern desalination, new Thames Tideway, one of the biggest investments in the capital for many, many years. And even when we're thinking about new mega data centres, as the government is thinking about, and thinking about how that impacts water systems locally. The transition to net zero and the industrial clusters that are building up around England and how they are going to interact with the water system. So we've got a legacy of 1,000 years built into our water system, and we're building on top of that legacy. And that legacy is also building on top of the natural system, which in England is very complex. We have, for what is a relatively modest European-sized country, 55,000 kilometres of waterways. So we have more waterways in the country than we have main roads. But most people don't realise that. And a lot of them are hidden. And that doesn't count for all the groundwaters and aquifers that we're also looking after. And individual water companies, of which we have a lot in the UK, have enough pipes underneath the towns and cities of the UK to go round the globe multiple times. So when you're thinking about the water system and thinking about resilience, you are thinking about a very big, complicated system. And that system has to work together with the natural and the built capital if we are to retain this thing we called resilience, if we're retaining enough clean, healthy water for everyone. So while we cannot yet control the weather in England, and we will still talk about it in the pub a lot, we do have to recognise our responsibility for managing the natural ecosystems as well as the man-made systems that keep our water supply resilient. So what about here and now? Well, we've just had in England a big review of how we manage water. And one of the things that review said was that we really need to take a much more sort of systematic, joined-up approach to how we manage that water system. So if we are to take that reflection on, how do we put that into practice in the reality, in the here and now? Well, we've already started through the National Framework for Water Resources to get new groups of people together. So we're getting companies together, we're getting the regulators together, we're getting farmers, we're getting NGOs to plan together around a water system to make sure that it responds to everyone's needs. So that's new, but what's even more challenging is what those groups are trying to do is go across boundaries. We all know about boundaries in water. You can draw a nice catchment and say that's your boundary, or you can draw where the groundwater is and say that's your boundary. But it never works that way. Maybe it does in other countries. It certainly doesn't in England. It crosses over with private sector boundaries. It crosses over with public sector boundaries, and it makes managing that system complicated. So we're trying at the moment to go across those boundaries to see how we can unlock billions of pounds of investment so that we can put that into increasing the resilience of our water supplies over the next 5 to 10 years. We're also investing heavily in the Environment Agency in the way that we monitor our water. Because when we think about resilience, we often think about the issues around drought or the issues around flooding, too much, too little water in the wrong places. But of course, the amount of water that you have interacts with the quality of the water that you have. And so when we are thinking about our monitoring system, we've got to think about how we can develop a system which is going to enable us to tackle the problems of tomorrow. It may sound an odd thing to say, but when we set up monitoring systems, we tend to look backwards. We look at what we were worried about and we monitor that. But we need, if we're thinking about resilience, to think about what we are going to need to be worried about, and we need to start monitoring that. Start building the models towards that, because that's going to enable us to adapt. Because, I'm afraid to say, I think we will make mistakes along the way. I don't believe we will snap our fingers and design the perfect system for the future. I can't predict what the weather's going to be next week, so I certainly can't predict what it's going to be like in 30 years' time. So we will have to adapt, and that requires really good information, and we've got a whole session thinking about data later. And lastly, I think we've got to invest in nature. This is part of the Environment Agency's approach, using nature-based solutions to see how they can add to the picture of resilience. Many of you who've thought about nature-based solutions will be very well aware they deliver far more than the one thing that they might have at their core. So they may be about storing water, but then they will add to the biodiversity, they will add to the water quality benefits that you will see from them. They are very often a very positive addition to the engineered solutions that we are also going to have to see. So that's now, but what about the future? Well, this is where it all gets very difficult, very murky to predict. But I'm quite excited today that we have such a fantastic range of people to try to think about where we could be going in so many different ways, because I think the key to the future is being able to integrate the data, the green infrastructure, the governance, to make it work in a way that it hasn't done in the past, so that it works in an uncertain future. So I'm just going to close by thinking back to my wonderful, rather soggy chalk stream. And if the chalk stream was talking to us about its legacy, it would be talking about the time when it was an ephemeral stream. It didn't flow all the time. It flowed through woodland. It doesn't do that anymore. And it supports an amazing assemblage of wildlife that's found in very few other places on the planet. So that's its past. And in its present, it now flows much more constantly. It's linked to the engineered water system. It's supplied, a lot of its water is supplied by water that's passed through our towns and our people into that system. It flows through farmland. It flows through towns, not woodlands. And it picks up all sorts of interesting things on the way. And then, what would it say about its future? Well, it's going to get warmer. Not a lot, not too quickly. I mean, luckily it's fed by an aquifer, so it's got a bit of resilience built in. But it will get warmer. And a lot of our chalk stream contains some very important fish to our fishing industry that don't like warm water. And with the best will in the world, I can't stop that warming. I might be able to mitigate against it. So how do I give that stream the space that it needs in the future to be resilient and give itself time to change? Because if there's one thing that I have learnt looking at our work with nature over the last 15 or so years that I've been focusing on it, is that if you give nature a bit of space and a bit of help, my goodness me, it can pay you back. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today, and I'm really looking forward to who thinks they have got the strongest argument about where we can learn most by looking back, looking now, or looking to the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rob. Can we have a round of applause? And you'll be back for data later.
I'll be back for data later.
I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. Okay, so the next part of the session is now going to follow. And our first panel includes from a legacy perspective, Nick Jarrett, who's Head of Sustainable Water Management at WSP. So Nick, do you want to come up? Can we have a round of applause for Nick? From a reality perspective, Priscilla Mauro, who's Director of Urban Design at Jacobs. So Priscilla. And from a possibility perspective, we've got Mark Smith, Strategic Water Sector Director at RSK. So Mark. So the first theme is going to be, is our inherited infrastructure a burden or a blueprint? And then we'll have, I'll ask the question, and then we'll go along and each person will answer against that question from their particular lens or perspective, okay? Then we'll move on to the next question. I'll explain the theme, and then each person. I hope everyone's prepared for that. If you're not, it doesn't matter, but we'll see how we go. They're nice, complicated rules. So the first question is, are our inherited water systems and policies holding us back, or are they the foundation we need to build a resilient future? So maybe Nick, if you want to start us off.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. So yeah, our legacy infrastructure and resilience. Climate change presents us with a rapidly changing world, but the challenges that it brings with it are the same challenges that our infrastructure was built to deal with. Sometimes there's too much water, sometimes there's too little water, sometimes it's not as clean as we would like it to be, and in that context, we've got in the UK, we've got a fantastic infrastructure that is there and it works well. It delivers clean water to our taps. It treats our dirty water. It defends us from floods. It stores water in times of scarcity. And we shouldn't forget the engineering, the infrastructure, the legacy, and the understanding and benefits that have driven that infrastructure and that we derive from that to give us that water foundation that we have in the country. Take my home city in London. Incredible infrastructure history and legacy around water from Bazalgette, London's sewage system, dealing with the Great Stink in the 1860s, through the Thames Barrier to prevent tidal flooding and protect us from flooding, and the Thames Tideway Tunnel, building on that and giving us that ongoing development of infrastructure. And that gives us a fantastic foundation with fantastic engineering and platform to build on. But the difficulty with climate change is that it presents us with new extremes that take us outside that history. So the challenges are the same: too much, too little, too dirty, but it's too much, too more. It's too little, but more. It's too dirty, but more. And those challenges overlap as well. And we're stretching that infrastructure up to and beyond breaking point. And a lot of the challenges that we see are about pushing out beyond that legacy that our infrastructure gives us. So we know we've got to build on that. We've got to add resilience. We've got to build on that infrastructure. Add adaptation to it. Start to work with nature more. Our history does not work well with nature, and that's probably a good point to pass on to Priscilla.
Thank you. So, when we talk about inherited infrastructure, retrofitting often feels like the most responsible or obvious option. But yeah, we can argue that it reduces waste, lowers carbon compared to building new. But retrofitting can also become a blocker. So much of our infrastructure was designed in a different era, so under different assumptions, and sometimes we are just patching a fragile and in a really carbon-intensive system that it's not necessarily the right solution. So layering fixes on top of outdated foundations, it's not the only option. So we can see this across different sectors. So if you're talking about energy, if you're talking about retrofitting old housing stock with insulation and efficient heating systems, it dramatically reduces carbon emission, but at the same time, it reveals the limits of how much you can update outdated building envelopes. It's not perfect. It's not necessarily the best solution. In transport, electrifying old rail networks can extend its lifespan, but at the same time, the track layout constrains speed, constrains capacity. So in the short term, it might be the answer, but not in the long term. And when you're talking about digital infrastructure, you can also add layers and layers to software into the legacy systems, but it's also a short-term solution. So the real challenge isn't about retrofits or how we retrofit. The real challenge is about why, whom, and how we are thinking about in the long term. So it's about thinking strategically. It's about not only extending the life of old systems, but also thinking about as a bigger opportunity to not only low carbon goals, but also innovation, also community needs, also not only getting driven by the urgency that all the challenges that are going through, but also how can we shift these old systems from being a burden to becoming a blueprint for our resilient future. Mark,
Okay.
our future, how does it look like?
Great team interaction. I'm very impressed.
I think we have to accept, and we have an infrastructure that exists. However, it does somehow seem a bit strange when we quote Victorian engineers as if they were the pinnacle of what we've achieved. It's 2025. I don't know when Mr. Bazalgette died, but it's a long time ago. And for those of us in the wastewater sector, you know, activated sludge treatment was invented in Manchester in 1924, right? So that's 100 years ago. And we're still putting those in. We're still putting carbon into concrete, into the ground, and we've spread that disease around the world, okay? So when I looked at this, you know, as team possibility, which is a fantastic, I hadn't seen that. Fantastic. I thought, okay, so what have we got? We've got to work with a centralized system that tries to control water. But physically, water is heavy. To move it is expensive. It takes energy. So I see a system that has to be broken up. Okay, so centralized is out. In the 90s, we took out all the small sewage works around the country, and we put in pumping stations, and we made bigger ones in the cities. And I bet you we wouldn't do it today. Okay? I did a lot of it. Okay? So we are still in the controlling water, controlling. Why are we controlling something that we need for life? Why aren't we living with it? And I think that's something that we need to think about. Legally, rivers in the UK are very strange. I would like to see rivers and their legal status changed to being, you know, access to all rivers being a public right. The water that comes out of your tap is the same water that was in that chalk stream, is the same water that you flushed down the loo. It's just got solids and other bits and pieces in it. It's the same water. And yet, people have no idea of that narrative. So I think we need to get into the schools. And I'm talking about, like, the Cunliffe report will help start this, but I think we need to be far more ambitious. 5-year plans didn't work very well for the Soviet Union. Why do we have them in the UK water sector? Because it's a simple way of retrofitting the last mistakes. That's why we have them. Now, I think we can do better than that. But I think the imagining and the imagination and the thinking that needs to do that, it's there. But it's not given the space it needs.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. So that was a good start. Let's have a round of applause for the first question. Pretty thought-provoking, and I think there's quite a lot in there. So I think I won't try and summarise. I'll leave it for everybody to muse over. So our next question, the themes around, you know, whose values shape the future of water. And the question is, should water decisions be driven by historical precedent, present-day needs, or future values we aspire to? So maybe Nick.
That's good. Well, it's an easier question than what I feared was coming of defends 5-year Soviet plans. So that's good. So how do we shape water? Whose values should shape water? And I think speaking from the legacy perspective, our history and our legacy leaves us with some really great strengths and frameworks. We've got a whole long history of structured, science-based foundation in terms of how we think about how we impact on water and on how water impacts on us. Approaches for flood risk assessments, environmental impact assessments, environmental flow targets, water resources planning, water quality, ecological status. We are not short of a directive, a regulation, a policy, and a framework in which to operate. And that gives us a really strong basis for analysing and understanding our actions, thinking about what we're going to do and the impacts that may have. And that brings stability, it brings consistency, but it also gives us a whole load of challenges. Climate change is stretching our policies, it's stretching our frameworks, our assessment foundations in just the same way that it's stretching our legacy infrastructure. And one challenge that I think is there as a particular one, and Rob touched on it with the temperature example from the chalk stream, is an awful lot of our basis for thinking about how we impact the water environment is grounded in a baseline. What's the baseline? What's the impact? How do we mitigate back to the baseline? But the baseline is moving, the baseline is changing, and it's going away. And sometimes what we're trying to protect is already gone. It's not the reality that is there. And we have to start thinking about frameworks that will adapt and evolve. And that's where falling into the trap of, but that's how we've always done it, is a massive mistake. We've got that strong science-based framework and foundation, but we've also got long-standing practices, how we've always done it, legacy of fragmented regulation, overlapping and underlapping responsibilities that leave gaps. And that can box us in many ways. And so our challenge is to start to break out of that and think in a different way while still building on that legacy.
Are you sure you're team legacy? Because
I feel
There might be a bit of overlap.
I feel there's a bit of overlap.
Lessons learned.
We shouldn't chuck it out. We shouldn't chuck it out.
Okay, so if you're talking about today, I think that balancing these competing demands around affordability, equity, environmental stress is really hard. It's not a simple task. We want households that can afford their own bills. We want communities to have access to water with a high quality. And also, we want our ecosystems to survive with all this climate change extremes that are coming our way. So we need to think bigger. And we need to think bigger now to allow a brighter future. So every infrastructure investment is an opportunity to deliver multiple benefits. It shouldn't be only about great infrastructure. People and nature, they are linked to what we are doing every single opportunity. So embracing opportunities to deliver nature-based solution through sponge city design, like expanding the use of permeable streets, how can we actually integrate this into policies like wetlands, green roofs, because green corridors, they are much more than green corridors. They improve public health. It's like the water solution bringing, achieving community goals and delivering better health and high quality life. So, and these principles are not only for the water sector, they are explored also in other sectors. Like when you're talking about hospitals, like hospitals that approach as a green campus, you actually support the recovery of patients. So, and we talk about transports, like cycling infrastructure, active travel. It's also about increasing public health and improving livability. So we need to look into how all the integration between sectors and the integration of what we do has a consequence in people and communities. Because when you're looking in a holistic way, in a way, you deliver resilience, you deliver equity, you deliver high quality green spaces that are tailored for the place-based needs, but also communities feel that their ownership and stewardship is the way forward. What's the way forward? Okay.
I'm very impressed with the transitions here. I wasn't expecting this at all.
So I had a lot of thought into this, and I then listened to a really amazing presentation this morning from a lady from Canada with who gave us the indigenous.
Inspirational.
And I thought, that's the answer. That's the answer. If we do not build systems where the values of the communities, of the people who are using that water, who need that water, well, then we're wasting our time. We're forcing people to live in a way that we don't want to live. And you know, I've got kids, and yes, it's a bit of a scary world at the moment. But we cannot live without water. That's it. End of story. So why are we in any way, shape, or form not having that as the first front and center decision of every single decision we make? I don't understand that. So to me, everything has to be for the community. I've already said water is heavy. If something is heavy, you don't want to move it that far. So water is therefore local. People experience climate change. Almost all of us will experience climate change through extreme weather. And weather is local. You know, it's raining outside. You know, if it's raining in London, who cares? I'm not there. It's raining here. No problem, right? Okay? Yeah. So we've got to think local. Therefore, that means amazing amount of work needs to be gone into narrative. We need to, again, go back into the schools. We need to start teaching people. Yes, it is extremely complex. It is extremely complicated. But in the UK, we're drowned by single-issue voices. People who want to control the water for their own needs, be that fishermen, be that housing developers, be that town planners, be that flood managers, it doesn't matter. They're single-issue people. They shouldn't have the voice. The voice should be the community. That's it. Because communities are multi-issue, or they should be. They can be if they're educated. So I think we've got to sort of come away from profit and blame, which is the defining front page of The Guardian for the summer. So who do we sack? Who do we get rid of? What's happening? Who do we put to jail? And nothing changes, right? Profit and blame have to go away, and we have to bring in equity and availability. We cannot start telling people that they need to change their life because we don't manage the water well enough. We need to change the way we manage the water to give them the best life that we can for future generations.
Thanks very much. Can we have a round of applause for that? So, don't go away. We're now going to, Kirsten's going to coordinate some audience questions. And I don't know if we can direct them to one person, because I think it might get a bit complicated. So,
let's go for Nick for this one. Fundamentally, as a society, we have yet to find a way to value water. Without this deep understanding, how can we move forward with water management in these uncertain times?
Blimey. Yes, I agree. It's the short answer. Valuing water, incredibly challenging. And I think that part of that challenge comes into what is it that we're trying to value? And almost valuing water is not necessarily the wrong question, but valuing the benefits from water come into play, I think, is the key part of that. And it's almost too valuable to find a way of putting a quantification on it. You know, as Mark said, no water equals no life. So we know that the value of not having water at all is the value of everything that exists. But how do we start to value individual ecosystem services, individual benefits, the benefit of doing this rather than that, is an incredibly complicated challenge, and one that I think we suffer at the moment from recognising it's complicated and thinking that the best place to start with that is, well, let's have another framework, let's have another mechanism for doing it, another way of framing it in there, and maybe we need to focus on getting something that gets us in the right ballpark, and then, as Mark says, talking to communities, and let's make some difference on the ground.
Local trade-offs. Second question.
Mark, how do you decentralise in a world where so many processes have so many stakeholders, where you need centralisation when it comes to representing just one community of stakeholders?
I think decentralisation is not the problem. The problem is centralisation, right? Okay, we are all local people. We live at home somewhere. We operate somewhere, wherever that is. You know, you go to your local pub. You don't drive 200 miles to go to, well, you might, I don't know. But, I don't drive 200 miles to go and have a half pint in a pub. So we operate locally. I think it's just the fact that it has suited people to catch water, pump water, and treat water. When I say decentralisation, I'm not talking about a physical breakup of the existing network. I think we don't do that. I think what we need to do is manage where people are now wanting to live in a different way to the way we did it. So everyone talks about the rivers at the moment being overloaded and stuff going into them and all the rest of it, okay? So nature-based solutions, okay, all that is good. But I can tell you, as an engineer, there's an awful lot of concrete going to be poured in the next 5 years to protect the rivers. Is that the right solution? I don't know. But when I talk about decentralization, I talk about bring local back into the conversation.
Priscilla, how do you think we can best bring people together to deliver a more integrated and inclusive future? How can we get strong partnerships at pace?
So, going back to your point about education, I think that once people are informed, I think they automatically want to know more, they want to get engaged, and they want to influence change. And I think partnership work, and a little bit linked to decentralization, is a collective problem, is a collective challenge, and we have to find a collective solution. So in a way, is acknowledging that if everyone does a bit, but if you do a bit together, aligned with visioning, it's just much more, it's much powerful. It delivers change. Otherwise, it's like, I flush less, I do that. It's not that. It's thinking collectively, how can we find a solution, and educating the community in the process.
Well, thank you very much. Let's have a round of applause for our first team. Thank you. So our second panel includes, from a legacy perspective, Alistair Chisholm, Director of Policy at CIWEM. Round of applause for Alistair. From a reality perspective, Louise Ellis, Associate Director from Arup. Louise. And from a possibility perspective, Mark Perrin, Programme Lead for Water at RAP. So, for Mark. Okay, so our third theme is, can we adopt fast enough to climate extremes? And our question, and we'll go with Alistair first, is our current pace of adaptation enough to meet the urgency of too little, too much, or too dirty water?
I would start off with asking whether that's a rhetorical question, Mark, to be honest. I think we'd probably all agree that that is a real challenge in it, and we're seriously running out of time, and the current pace isn't anywhere near enough. We've been very UK-centric in this discussion at the moment, and I think at the global level, if we were going at the right kind of pace that we have to be going at, you wouldn't have had a global commission on adaptation that existed a few years ago. You wouldn't have concepts like the race to resilience. Why do we need a race? Because we're not going fast enough. And you wouldn't have experts describing adaptation as the Cinderella of mitigation. And, you know, we've got to draw this back to, you know, the mitigation bit. I don't think you can really fully divorce the adaptation and resilience piece from the mitigation piece. And the reason we're not going fast enough on adaptation and resilience is because we're not going fast enough on the mitigation piece either. And climate change is advancing faster than we probably expected it to. I'm going to pull back to the UK context to give you a kind of a pretty tangible planning and regulation example of why we're going so slowly. 2008, the UK introduced the Climate Change Act. At that point in time, it was regarded as a world-leading piece of regulation. It had two sides. It had the mitigation piece, which essentially set carbon budgets, which were legally binding, that the UK government had to deliver against. And it also had an adaptation side to it, which you may be less aware of because it doesn't get anything like the attention. But that adaptation side of things had to understand the risks to the UK and set those out in a risk assessment. The government had to set out a programme of measures that were going to tackle those risks. There was an adaptation reporting power that was put on organisations to report into the government, advising on what a whole range of organisations were doing to adapt to climate change. And there's supposed to be a national adaptation programme in place, which would be a strategic programme that would essentially trickle down to all manner of areas of activity to strategically drive our adaptation and resilience progress. In the same way, I've got to stop. Unfortunately, none of those things are really happening very much at all. The CCRA, the risk assessment, is good. The adaptation reporting power, barely engaged with outside public bodies, critical infrastructure operators, and the National Adaptation Programme has really failed, and the government's advisor has said as much, to really give that strategic level national steer. So on all those levels, no, we're really not going fast enough, and there's not that much evidence that we're going to pick up the necessary pace.
Thank you, Alistair, and over to Louise. Oh, round of applause, please.
Afternoon, everybody. As Team Reality, I'm going to argue that we need to speed up adaptation, but we already have many of the tools and approaches. We just need to adopt them. That includes thinking about things like the range of potential futures that we could experience, adopting processes like adaptive planning and adaptive pathways, looking at the longevity and adaptation of our solutions, and then also speeding up delivery. If I first take understanding what the range of potential futures look like, as a sector, we've been developing through multiple iterations, repositories of these trends, projections, targets. It's a time that we bring those together to help organizations to strategically plan. And we've been doing that. We have tools such as the 1, 3, 10, 30 tool, which looks at the kind of range of information that we have out there. And they can really help organizations think about the complexity of the future, but also think about the long-term systemic change and bridge that into something that's practical, tangible, and applicable to today's circumstances. If we think about long-term planning next, we need to use adaptive planning to kind of navigate this uncertainty. It gives us a way of having both agility and foresight, allowing us to kind of identify those low regrets actions that we can take now, those that make sense under a range of potential scenarios, whilst preparing for those larger interventions that are needed further down the line. We have these approaches. We've just trialed them and piloted them as part of the National Flood and Coast Innovation Programme. We just need to move to adoption with them. We also need to think about the longevity and adaptability of our solutions. We can't keep building larger and larger concrete tanks. I'm going to get lots of smiles because I know it's a hobby horse of mine. We're going to struggle to treat all the sewage in these tanks. Instead, we need a much better integrated approach between green and grey solutions to manage rainwater at its source as much as possible. Through things like nature-based solutions, initiatives like Rainscape in Llanelli in Wales and Mansfield. My first project was Rainscape in Llanelli. It feels like we've been piloting nature-based solutions for almost 2 decades now. I think it's time that we move into adoption and mainstreaming. It's really time in this space to flip the narrative and think about water not as a problem, but as a resource. And finally, we need to speed up delivery. With 30 strategic resource options, these large water resource schemes on the table in the UK, there's an opportunity to learn lessons from each of them and roll forward into the next one. We also need to learn lessons from other sectors, places where it's gone well and places where it's also gone badly. There's opportunities to learn from transport infrastructure projects. I love my transport colleagues, but things like the rail review, under programs like Greener, Faster, Cheaper, which has done a review of a number of major projects in the UK and identified some of the enablers that are needed to improve the delivery of our major projects. Over to you, Mark.
So it's my turn.
Could we just have a round of applause for Louise? More pilots than EasyJet. Over to you, Mark.
So it's my turn to talk about possibilities. And working at RAP, we work with the food sector on the impact of the food sector on the environment. So I'm going to focus really on green infrastructure in what I say here today. I think there are a number of adaptation strategies that we need to focus on in that space. We focus on catchment scale action and collective action, where the catchment becomes the client. And we realize that there needs to be a long-term strategy to adapt and transform in our terms of how we use land in this country. I think there are 3 areas I'd like to propose. One, and it's been mentioned in Rob's keynote already, really queued me up for this, we need a long-term, short, medium and long-term strategy to support scaling of nature-based solutions across the country. And this is important because water risks are addressed by a range of nature-based solutions, be it flooding, ecological risks, and many others, and because of the vast range of co-benefits in terms of our addressing the biodiversity crisis that we face too. There are emerging possibilities to fund nature-based solutions, too many to go into, but they relate also to downstream major infrastructure and the risks that you see in terms of flooding and other risks attached to them. And NBS is therefore emerging as an economic opportunity, and we need to work hard on how it does become an even greater one. The second one connects the ecological status of river health with climate, and there are links there, and realizing that the way we use land in terms of farming, livestock and poultry and dairy needs to change. The nitrates and phosphorus loads in our rivers need to go down, and we need strategies to deal with that problem. And we need to work with the supply chain, with them, not against them. We need regulations that are properly enforced, and we need incentives and strategies and learning to deal with that. And then the third strategy, which I propose, connects with that learning point. I think we need a real emphasis on knowledge and learning, especially connecting climate with other impacts on the environment. We know lots already, though, about what needs to be done. It shouldn't stop us acting now. But nature is inherently, never fully understood, and the relationship between climate and river health and other aspects is really dynamic. We've got some work going on in conjunction with WWF. We've got some work going on which is informing our projects, which is modelling some of the 4 or 5, 6 landscape scale interventions that could potentially be used to farm in a different way, which would really impact in a good way river health, which needs to be done at scale. And scaling that learning and that understanding is absolutely crucial, because there are too few people that understand the solutions across the sector. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Round of applause, please. So for our second question and the themes, how do we manage competing priorities in water governance in terms of affordability, climate resilience and water quality? So where should power and responsibility lie in driving water policy and regulation? Alistair.
Okay, legacy perspective, start in the now. If you're England, UK based, you will know that we have had this independent water commission that's looked at water governance and how we should be doing it in future. And it's come up with this radical proposal that we should manage water regionally around river basins. Now, from a legacy point of view, now, sorry, I'm being really flippant in my sarcasm there, because it's something that I do wholeheartedly support in the way that they're proposing that it's done. But from a legacy point of view, we have been doing that since before water privatisation. We used to have water boards, and then privatised water companies kind of followed similar-ish spatial setups. We've got EA regions that, again, are aligned pretty much to those areas. And the proposed new regional water authorities are now going to broadly adopt a similar spatial thing. The other legacy factor, because all of those river basins and the catchments that make them up, they have really valuable plans. There's loads of really valuable knowledge that exists within them, tons of these plans. But those are too often non-statutory, get trumped by centralised national level political policy priorities and siloed decision making around things like keeping bills low, prioritising growth rather than resilience, and those kind of things. Now, what might be different for the future in this whole renewed legacy picture is that what's being proposed is looking to fill what has been termed the missing middle between that kind of national level siloed decision making and what's really going on the ground. And if you look at the impacts of that national level priorities on the people on the ground, that missing middle is getting a bit knocked off with the consequences that we're seeing played out in our river basins. And so that speaks to the whole collaborative working, the partnership working piece that everybody is talking about so much already in this conference and is vital. But I do think from a legacy point of view is quite an anathema to us as humans. We're not really wired to do things that way, so it is really hard. But if we can nail it, then I think we're looking at a brighter future.
Thanks. This team's pushing the envelope, so be quick with your clapping. Louise.
From what am I now? A reality perspective. From a reality perspective, I think we need to collectively kind of develop a national vision that sets the long-term direction and outcomes for the sector. As Al says, part of the challenge is that at a national level, we have these competing priorities and we haven't rationalized those together and brought those outcomes to give a direction of travel for the sector. And we need to bring affordability, climate resilience, water quality into a national vision. And that allows the stakeholders then to drive towards this common purpose. And over time, hopefully improve confidence and trust in the sector, which is what we crucially need to do at the moment. On panel 1, Mark talked about kind of single issue voices, and I think one of the crucial things that needs to happen is that decisions need to be holistic and well understood, and their impacts assessed, recognizing those really critical trade-offs that need to be made. And we've got to surface those trade-offs in policy, in planning, and then in investment decision-making, getting that really kind of clear line of sight between them. And we have tools that can do this and that can help us think about these things. I mean, they should only be used in support of discussion and discourse, but they can help us, things like multi-capitals frameworks. There's some work that Jeanette and team at Ofwat have funded on mainstreaming nature-based solutions, which has developed a common value framework for the water sector, looking at the kind of broader benefits that nature-based solutions can bring and how they can be kind of equally considered against grey solutions. And that also allows us to understand the benefits and beneficiaries more broadly, and then the potential routes for investment to attract finance into this space. I think the other thing to do is to think about how we work across systems better. We need to recognize the interaction of water, energy, food, economic growth, and conscious of time, but how to encourage developers to build water-smart communities. How do we work with energy district network operators to improve the resilience of our water systems? Who plays the role in the resilience of our water systems from a power perspective? Should the water providers be duplicating the work of the energy DNOs, or should they be collaborating and cooperating in deciding that kind of systems-based planning perspective?
Round of applause, please. And on to you, Mark.
Thanks. So at RAP, we do quite a lot of thinking about the just transition. And I think the just concept of the just transition definitely needs to be involved in when you're thinking about governance. I think from our perspective, or from my perspective as well, we need to place communities at the heart of governance. It already has been said, actually, and I think in theme 2, in a sense. But obviously, the private sector are integral to communities. So I wanted to just touch on a couple of points on the private sector and the role the private sector could play. they're part of the system. They're often influential, especially major players. They already play a huge, sometimes outsized role. But we need to realise really that they already play a huge, sometimes outsized role in governance. They're already doing daily decision making that affects what they invest in, where they grow, what water they use. It governs every relationship between land use and water impact. So, the private sector can definitely play a role, and they should play a role, but how is the question, I guess. This obviously is going to vary sector by sector. The food sector, which we work with, very fragmented. Maybe at the top, less fragmented, but as you go further down, thousands and thousands of farmers around the country. But how do you I think the key challenge here is how do you put governance mechanisms in to ensure that all voices are heard? Within food, there is potential for that, and that's partly because I think there's a lot of sort of food-related suppliers that operate on a regional scale. Like they've got centre of gravity in certain regions, and I think there's potential there because if we think about regional planning, regional leadership, they can be brought in there. But I think 2 points I'd lastly make. One is that alignment on outcomes is absolutely crucial, and also strong coordination and leadership, which is inclusive, that builds in these voices, including the private sector, is also absolutely vital.
Thanks very much. Round of applause, please. Given that you stretched the envelope a little bit, we're going to take one question that's come. And Kirsten?
Yeah, I'm going to make it a super quick one. So we just want to know, what do you think the biggest knowledge gap is existing that needs to be filled to support change? And we just want your kind of gut reaction, not much explanation.
Each of you. Biggest knowledge gap?
At the top of government, outside the Environment Department and its agencies.
Okay. Louise?
Biggest knowledge gap. I think probably our understanding of broader financing mechanisms and kind of using those properly and effectively.
Mark?
I think how to chart a course. I think the leadership point that I just made is quite important to address. How to chart that course and lead that course. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Can we have a round of applause for Team 2? So our third panel includes, for legacy, you've already seen him, Dr. Rob Bradburn, Chief Scientist at the Environment Agency. Rob, round of applause. For reality, we've got Alex Adam, Director of Strategy and Stewardship at the Rivers Trust. Alex. And for possibility, we've got Jeanette Henderson, who's a principal at Ofwat. So Jeanette. Okay, so theme 5 is innovation. Are we building a legacy of collaboration or complexity? So our question is, will digital tools and data sharing transform water resilience, or are they creating new silos and dependencies? So Rob.
It's a brilliant question, and the first thing I want to say is don't think that UK regulator is stuck in the past. I am on Team Legacy, but we are looking to the future and doing things differently. Just thought I needed to say that. But
respect. Yeah.
Let me lay down a bit of a suggestion about why we should look to the past. The first thing is one of the things that I get told so many times in my job is the value of long-term data sets. Nature is really messy. And if you only look back or you look at what's happening this year, you will come up with some really odd answers. You need to have that long-term vision. Going back into the past, we've already heard the baseline is shifting. If you only do a baseline once, you're not going to know what ground you're standing on. So you need that long-term data sets. We're currently trying to move about 260 million of them. that we hold in one very old creaking IT system onto a new system so that we can actually engage in the future from it. But it's that existing data which is going to give us a lot of power. When we find a new problem, very frequently my organisation will come to me and say, Rob, come on, Chief Scientist, go and get some more data. Go out there, get some more data. That will solve the problem. And actually, a lot of the time I say, do you realise, have you read the 260 million bits of data first before you go out and get some new? And also, it's not just data. One of the huge powers we have is integrating science and data and building on the legacy of what we know and using that data in different ways. So I think as long as we know why that data was collected, and it was collected in silos, yeah, absolutely, it was collected for reasons, but as long as we know why, we've got the modern tools to use, we can extract so much more value out of that data from the past, and I think that will help us get out of the silos rather than push us further in.
Thanks, Rob. Alex. Oh, round of applause for Rob. Alex.
Short answer is yes, on both fronts, I think. I think there's a huge amount of digital innovation, certainly over the last 8 years since I've been in the Rivers Trust. There are new tools coming out time and time again, not only with tools with data, but people enabling people to translate and understand that data. So people might remember, this is UK-centric, so apologies, but we did the sewage map during COVID, and that raised public awareness about quite how much muck was going into rivers, and that's actually driven a huge amount of change. So that's one example about taking that data, and we've got a lot of it, but it's how do we then interpret it and present it back to people. So there's a huge amount of innovation, a huge amount of opportunity. That said, I think if we're not careful, we might just create more and more and more tools. You know, there's another clever thing in a box that comes out. You know, one of the things, so one of the key barriers around collaboration, cross-sector collaboration, we can come onto this, is about what's that one version of the truth? Whose plan are we looking at? How do we bring those plans together? And I think if I may, from a kind of a sort of both a legacy and a future perspective, what we need is the frameworks for the market to develop those tools, to show that innovation, to stimulate that demand, but do that in a way that ultimately will provide the interoperability that we're going to need for it to be delivered on the ground.
Round of applause for Alex. And get your questions in because this team are on time, so we're going pretty well. Jeanette.
I think you stole some of my bits. You must have been reading my notes over your my shoulder.
Not that handwriting, no.
Not that handwriting.
Could have been a doctor.
It could have been a doctor. Collaboration is really, really essential in working across this area, especially in digital transformation. I was going to talk about the need to design for interoperability. We've got the potential for all the nice new shiny things, but we need to really think about our data standards and our data governance and try and get that right before we start building new things on. And it's really hard because there's the race to do it. I run an innovation fund. Every year we get new bids for new shiny bits of AI and machine learning. And they are absolutely fantastic. They can do so much to help us with that data, looking back on some of the things that, looking back at some of the data we've got and trying to understand with machine learning and AI what might happen in the future. And we've got some fantastic examples in the Ofwat Innovation Fund. I'm going to mention a couple. So Stream, the open data platform, all the water companies are collaborating to put data sets out on in a standardized format for people to use. Wouldn't it be great if they could also put those data standards in a way that the regulators could get access to, so we can reduce the duplication and sending in different bits of data to different regulators? There's some fantastic stuff around modelling. One of my favourite projects is called Credo, and it's looking at collaboration between water, energy and telecoms, and the interoperability, the interreliance on them in cases of climate issues. So if there's a flood, what's affected? Is it just water? Is it telecoms? Is it energy? And how do you actually work out where you should spend your money? Where should you invest to make something climate resilient, to adapt? And finally, one of my favourite projects at the moment, not just because of the name, River Deep Mountain AI, is modelling streams and actually looking at historic data and looking at flow rates and all sorts of things and putting those data sets out in the public. They just, in the last month, put stuff on GitHub for people to be able to access and then to try and test and use. So we've got some really fantastic examples in the Innovation Fund that could really help further collaboration and also simplification.
Thanks very much. That deserves a round of applause. We should have called this session "The Tides They Are A-Changing." There you go. Bum. Right, so theme 6, can we truly integrate water thinking across sectors? And the question is a holistic interdisciplinary approach achievable, or are these just buzzwords? Rob?
So this was a really interesting question to think about from a legacy point of view, because I thought, actually, if we think about the English system, I think there is something that we can learn, but we have to look quite a long way back. Because if you go back hundreds of years in the English situation, water was managed with far more visibility and immediacy in people's lives. It was really part of people's lives. It was a very, very valuable asset because it was the thing that generated your crops. It was the thing that generated your energy. It was the thing that made the difference between you being very ill and perhaps not quite so ill. And therefore, it was managed within communities in a much more joined up way. I think one of the things I'm really looking forward to this week is looking around the world, because I think some of that immediacy and visibility is much more apparent in places outside of places like England, where we have spent the last few hundred years chopping up our water sector, giving people different bits of responsibility, owning bits of it, even though the water is flowing through it. And as has been said, it's the same H2O. So I think we have a real opportunity not only to look back, but to look sideways. Because as I said, when I stood up here at the front, we're going to have to take a more joined up approach if we're going to be resilient. So we absolutely should be learning from people all around the world about where that works really well.
Thanks, Rob. A round of applause for Rob and over. Alex?
So we take a small step, water is part of the catchment, it's part of the system. So I think we're all agreed that we've got to take a systems-based approach around this. And if we're going to build resilience, it's not about, we have to build resilience and be adaptive, because these changes are going to happen, and they're going to happen more quickly, more frequently, more extremely. So we need to look at everything as a system. So when we come back to the data and the silos and the integration, we've got to be careful we don't just take a water lens. Water is the currency in natural capital. We've got to see, how are we managing our land around that water? What are we doing? What are we paying farmers for in terms of flood mitigation? And at the moment, the UK government, we don't know where we're spending that money. We don't geolocate where our public sector funding is going. Now, if we could break that down, if we could get to the stage where, as bill payers, taxpayers, we actually really understand where that money's being channeled, then we have a really big opportunity to make sure we're maximising that money for the benefit of society and farmers and the food chain and all the rest of the society. So is it a buzzword? It probably is a buzzword, but it's an absolute fundamental reality. And we need to grip the reality and move quickly, because we're running out of time. We really are.
Thanks, Alex. That's worth a round of applause. Thank you. And Jeanette?
Can we integrate across sectors? Absolutely, we can. Do we need new models to do this? Potentially. We've seen some really fantastic examples of cross-sector working in the Innovation Fund. I'm team optimist here, by the way, as well as team possibility, because I get to see all the new stuff that's happening and all the joined up working and the partnerships that are happening. When we started the Innovation Fund 5 years ago now, we said one thing you have to do, you have to work in collaboration. And we've seen collaboration in so many different ways. We've seen it between water companies, with NGOs, we've seen it with academia. We've got loads and loads of different people working together. We've now even got regulators working as part of our projects. The Environment Agency, you're on so many of the things. Maintaining nature-based solutions has been mentioned before. That's got water companies working together with the Rivers Trust, with the Wildflower and West Trans Trust, with contractors like Jacobs and people like that, as well as with the regulators. They're sitting on panels. So we're working across sectors in the UK. One of my favourite projects at the moment is being run by Thames and the GLA. They are looking at how you can make opportunities to install SUDs. And one of the big costs around SUDs is actually digging a hole in the ground. So if a gas company or something is they're digging a hole, why not put a SUDS back in instead of putting in some more concrete? And they're looking at how they can actually develop a market on that. It's a fantastic project. Look it up on our website, Ofwat Innovation Fund. But we're also working things like WaterNet Gain is looking at working between agriculture and water companies and seeing if you can create ponds in farmlands and things like that, so that water to slow the flow, but also to give farmers a new source of water. So there's loads of really great collaboration going on. And we're collaborating internationally as well. So our Net Zero Hub that's been run by Severn Trent has got all of the water companies in the UK, plus Australia and the Netherlands are part of the project. But we've got people coming from other parts of the world to learn from us. And that's really great. And we also want to learn from them. So there's lots of really fantastic stuff going on in the UK at the moment around cross-sector collaboration. And we hope to do more. One more minute. We're starting a cross-sector innovation fund. It will be launched next year, and we'll be trying to really, really drive cross-sector innovation. Energy, water, agriculture, water, even mining on water. And how can we do that? So we're going to look at what we can do next year. So watch this space.
Thanks very much, Jeanette. So round of applause. I think we'll take a couple of questions, just so we get the time right and give and ensure Lizzie's got plenty of time to sum up. So maybe a couple of questions?
Perfect. I'll start with Rob. We've heard about the importance of data standards and protocols. In the context of those challenges, is it better to have no data or bad data?
Oh. I remember making one team leader very cross when we did a training course years and years ago where I had to flash a Morse code signal to a friend of mine on a hill 4 miles in the distance. And I knew that I'd been given the wrong information to send that person. And I said to the leader of the course, I refuse to send this information because it is wrong. I know where that person is. I can go and get them, and we will avoid there being a disaster. I was told in no uncertain terms that the game would work, and I was to do as I was told, and to stop being so clever. So I don't like bad data, is what I'm coming to. One of the things that I'm really, really keen on is that the data that any of my teams produce can be relied on. We put an enormous amount in to checking data and making sure it's right. And we have to. You know, we have lots of examples where just forms get filled out wrong. So ultimately, I want robust data, but the tools are getting better. The tools are getting better. So in some cases, lower quality data, perhaps some data that you can get by novel methods, crowdsourcing, social media type data, you can use it. So with the advancing computer skills, probably bad data will be just a bit more useful than no data at all. But let's still try and get it as good as we can, as we've heard, get the data standards right, understand where it's coming from, because that will be the best data.
And Kirsten, our last question.
Yeah, well, so I'll build on that one a little, and this one's for Alex. What do you feel about the role of open data in the sector? How far should it go, and how do we ensure it builds trust, not erodes it?
Oh, great question. I think we need to have real transparency about where the data comes from, and I think as a matter of principle, it should be open data by default, from government data, water company, if public money is going into that in any which way, shape or form, it should be open data by default. But we should also then provide, as I touched on, the frameworks where we can enhance that data with additional sources. So citizen science, case in point. We've got inadequate data, we're making poor decisions based on inadequate data. But if we can create frameworks with the relevant standards and the checks and balances in place where we can augment that, I think we must do that. It's, some of the more, innovative things that have happened in the water sector in the last 5 years have been based on those principles. We do need to be careful about how that data is then interpreted. So I think some of this will need caveats and need to be refined. But I do think, as a matter of course, anything that's got public sector funding associated with it or taxpayers should be open by default. Great. Can we have a round of applause for panel 3, please? If you'd like to take a seat now. And I'm now going to invite Lizzie Budden up to give her closing remarks on the 3 competing perspectives. Round of applause.
Guess I can be stood up for this. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Lizzie Budden, and it's an honor to be invited onto this stage at the end of this panel as a young water professional sponsored by Arab. So thank you, Arab. I've actually worked for the past 5 months with the UN in Beirut, making a water resilience framework for Arab states. So I've really enjoyed sitting and listening to the varying perspectives on resilience in the UK. It's my pleasure to synthesize the discussion we've heard today and to offer a few of my own closing thoughts. So today's panel set out to examine the climate resilience of the UK's water sector through 3 temporal lenses: legacy, reality, and possibility. We heard from the legacy team about the immense value of the infrastructure and institutions we have, but also the ways they can constrain us when facing unprecedented challenges. We heard from the reality team about the need to balance the competing priorities of today. And finally, we heard about transformative possibility, bold ideas for regenerative systems, innovative governance, and cross-sector collaboration. So if I were to sort of draw a thread between all of the conversations that we heard today, it would be this: that our legacy infrastructure, ways of doing, ways of thinking, ways of providing water can serve as a point of reference. We should not, however, be slave to these baselines and frameworks which address conditions that no longer exist. It seems that climate change is always one step ahead of us, one step ahead of our baselines and frameworks. And we must prepare for a range of futures, this concept of decision-making under deep uncertainty. We can do this by bridging the knowledge gap using data, knowledge sharing, and integrating voices of the UK community that have traditionally not been included in decision-making around water issues. Am I okay for time? Yeah. So since I have time, I'd like to talk for a minute about the definition of resilience. This discussion had me thinking about how resilience is so much more than a buzzword or a fashionable term. The resilience of a good system entails robustness, redundancy, flexibility, integration, inclusiveness, justice, and equity. And a system that lacks these qualities isn't resilient, it's just rigid. So when facing climate challenges, governments, institutions often get caught up in questions of increasing the resilience of the system. How can we do that? The steps we have to take to achieve resilience. However, I see that there's a step before this phase that often gets skipped, which is when we ask ourselves, is the system worth preserving and fortifying, or do we actually need a new system? Resilience is the ability to cope and adapt, but it's also to know when to transform and shed ourselves of old systems and ways of thinking. As we shift into more transformative approaches to climate resilience, cross-sectoral dialogue, nexus thinking, I heard moving away from single-issue voices, and as Rob said, looking sideways. I really like that. That's what will take us forward, and it's events like these that make it happen, as well as all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes on a smaller scale. We, the younger generation, as I'm speaking as a youth representative, will inherit the systems that you are all shaping today. Systems of governance, systems of thought, and physical systems. But we, as the youth, are also bringing energy, urgency, and new ways of thinking. The more we can embed youth voices alongside all this technical expertise, the stronger and more equitable that legacy will be. So thank you, Arab, for sponsoring young water professionals to incorporate them into dialogues like today's panel. Thank you once again to the UK Pavilion for organizing this panel. And thank you to my fellow speakers, participants, and attendees, both online and in person. And I wish you all a fruitful and engaging World Water Week. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. Wow, and what a fantastic way to draw our session to a close. And I think, I don't know, it's one of the best sessions I've been to for an awful long time. Inspirational, I think, would come out of it. So I'd like to thank you, and please, in the appropriate way, I'd like to thank our inspirational teams, our coordinators, Kirsten and Ellie, our keynote, Rob, and our summariser, Lizzie. And to all of you, I hope you enjoy the rest of the week. This is the sort of thing you come to Stockholm for, and it's insightful and it's inspirational. So enjoy yourselves. Thanks very much.